I mean, I would have actually waited until the end for clapping, but thanks again for having me and for the invite. I've participated in a few of the Clue seminars before, and I always wanted to give a talk as well to give back to this networking group. And thanks for having me here today. The title may look a little bit different than what you got in the emails. So yeah, it's I called it connecting the dots because our groups, we use a logo that kind of like dots, so they're connected. And then also kind of looking past what I've done in the last like 10 years, it kind of feel like loads of stuff were kind of connected together. So what I'm gonna talk about is my experience as a usability and user experience researcher for the last, as I said, a couple of years. It was funny because, you know, Facebook sent you this notification that like 7 years ago you did that, 8 years ago you did that. So I got one that 10 years ago you accepted this position at that company. And then around the same time, then I got invited to come and give a talk here, and I was kind of trying to come up with a title. And then I said, okay, I'm kind of doing this for 10 years, so that might be a nice title for this. And there are two goals that I have today. I'm gonna review basically different projects that I did. And I thought it could be interesting for like students, either undergrad or grad students. You could maybe see the connection because it's basically based on the timeline and stuff that I've did many years ago and the stuff that we are working on right now. So I thought it might be nice to see how like my research program has developed over like 10 years from when I was a master's student to now that I'm a faculty member. Also for faculty member, I thought if you guys found something interesting, we always look for collaborations. So that's I thought maybe that could be something interesting here. One other note before I go to the actual presentation, I'm gonna refer, as I said, to projects that we did in the last couple of years, and I put all of them on my website. So if there is something that you got interested and you want to check it out, if you go to my website, I just posted like a blog post today, which kind of detailed all the, or at least have references to all the papers that I'm gonna discuss. So with those notes, let's kind of dive back more than 10 years ago. I finished my undergrad as a computer hardware engineer, and I got specialized to do like networking. So I kind of learned, I think it's called CCNA or CCNP, things like that. So kind of programming Cisco switches. At that time, there were also 3Com. I don't think they exist anymore, but they also had these hubs or switches that was like really cool before 2000. I did that for a few years. I kind of got to be a network administrator for a bank, and then I thought it's kind of boring job. Sorry if you are doing network. For me, it was boring, and then I decided to leave it. And then I went to Sussex University back in the UK, and I did my master in informatics and human-computer interaction. Actually, it was informatics, and then I had to take an elective course on HCI, and then I found out, oh, that's what I want to do for the future. I finished my master, and then I got a job as a UX designer in a big holding company. So we had like 10, or the company had 10 other smaller companies. So I was responsible mostly at that time to build like websites, good websites, and review their products. And on the side, I was also teaching as a sessional in 2 colleges. After a few months or like half a year of doing that, I realized that I really enjoy the teaching side. And then I thought, okay, maybe I should go back and do my PhD. So I went back to the Sussex University. I got a PhD offer there, and then I was quite lucky because the way that PhD started or scheduled was I got to work. My professor started a company inside the university as like a business initiative, and then we said, okay, we're gonna do usability and user experience evaluation for games in the market, commercial game, and the company was called Vertical Slice. So we started that 2009, 2009. And so my kind of first day as a PhD student, I had to go and work with a big game publisher on their game. So quite an experience. And I was introduced to them as a person who is doing a PhD in game user experience, and that was my day one. Later on, the company turned to a kind of rebranded as a company called Player Research, and they still exist. They still exist today. They are based in Brighton. They are just opening a branch in Montreal, Canada as well. So this kind of grow a lot. And during my PhD, all the project that I worked on was basically commercial titles. So I had to study how to evaluate games or apply my research into something that developer had to use immediately. And most of the cases in my PhD, there are case studies on some of these titles. Once I finished the PhD, I got a job at UOIT, so University of Ontario in Oshawa, 4 hours train ride from here. And so I joined there as a faculty member to teach game design and game usability and user experience. My background, as you've seen, was kind of built from working with game companies. And I was kind of lucky that I had an opportunity to have or work for one of the kind of major players in the indie development industry called Execution Lab in 2015 until a few months ago. I worked as a UX director for the company and looked after all the evaluation work on for our studio. So it's around 19 studio, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this. But these are few games that we released with Execution Lab. Probably you guys have maybe heard of PewDiePie. That's our most famous game. But coming back to what we do and our research, so I kind of lead a research group called UXR at UOIT, and what we do, we call us applied users and user experience research on interactive technology. So there are 3 areas that we focus on. One is working on methods and tools for game evaluation. Then kind of following on that is working on designing and evaluation guidelines, mostly focusing on novel interactive or interaction modalities. And kind of, again, due to the popularity actually of a serious game and persuasive technology. So we also have some project looking at development of games that aim to do behavioral change or rehabilitation system. Our group is currently, we have 3 PhD students, 5 master students, and 8 research assistants. Today, I'm going to put more emphasis on the first kind of theme of project that we're going to do. And that's, as I said, basically motivated through what I did as part of my PhD. Why I like to call ourselves applied? Because my focus is on formative evaluation on games that are under or in development. It's quite interesting because most of our projects are either sponsored or motivated by problem that a game developer face, and they come to us to solve that problem. And that's a slightly different when you do kind of, let's say, maybe more summative type of evaluation or just maybe like theoretical work. Like I have some criteria here that it's kind of bring constraints to the research that we do. Some of them could apply to any research, for example, or any usability or user research. For example, you always want to have representative participants. So that's key regardless of your focus. Or you, of course, want to have like accurate or a specific, finding or result. But there are some stuff that it kind of feel more important when you are looking at the kind of that applied work or formative evaluation for companies, such as timely. So most of our project, we don't have the luxury of kind of waiting and analyzing and like, okay, like this didn't work, maybe we should wait or like redesign the stuff. we have to report back to the company like in a week or so. So that means the way we collect data, the way we do our evaluation need to happen relatively fast. Again, as I said, most of our projects are sponsored by companies. So and they, unlike government, they have a smaller budget. So the cost of that project is become important. As well as when we give them feedback, we want them to act on it. So if we just go and say that, look, here is kind of a bunch of stats, then they're gonna say, okay, so what do I do with this? What should I change in my game to make it better for users? So that's why I kind of highlight that motivational or actionable aspect of what we try to deliver. Any basically user evaluation or user research project would involve selecting, methodologies for evaluating users' experience with your product. And there is a big range of methods that are available, and I'm not going to go through them. But I think the key interesting part, at least in terms of research, would be how we mix these methods together to be able to have a better understanding on how players, in our case, experience the game, and what sort of comments we can make to developer to improve that experience. And I have a video here to show you what I mean by this mixed methodology. So before I play the video, I just want to point out at different kind of data sets that we have here. And that's the work in 2011, as you see on the kind of a timeline there. So here we are looking at basically observing gameplay video, so kind of a footage from the gameplay, mapped to players' kind of sitting position, like their change in, like if they're leaning forward or backward. We have a game control monitor. Again, in 2011, that was super cool. Now you could make a much simpler one. So here we can see if, for example, they are accelerating, it's a kind of racing game, or I don't know, like, which buttons they are pressing on the controller. And the kind of little graph here is the kind of a raw data from their galvanic skin response, which is the change of kind of amount of sweat in their skin cells. That shows or could be an indication of change in their emotional level, especially in terms of their arousal, so excitement or frustration. And the green dot is where they're looking at. So it's the data coming from the eye tracker that is in front of the user. So we have these, and that's what I mean by mixed method or mixed data set. So as I play the video, you could see that I know where they are looking. I know if they're feeling differently, and I can kind of know what button they were pressing. And collecting all these information together help us as a user researcher in games to make a more accurate recommendation to developer on things such as, you try to show them a feedback, but they never looked at it. That's why they didn't press the button that you hoped they would press, and kind of build on that argument. I want to kind of show you a little bit. Again, these are some of the graphs from our playtesting. Just as an experiment, I asked users I gave them this empty kind of chart, and I said, okay, can you draw a graph representing your feeling or your experience after playing like half an hour? And in most of them, what they could immediately remember after the gameplay was kind of quite minimal information. Like in this case, the player remembered that at the beginning he maybe didn't have much fun. Then as soon as he realized he's gonna win, that kind of maybe the experience build up, but then as soon as he realized he's gonna win the game, then the experience decreased. So lack of information or data there. This is one of the most detailed one that we received, but still it's kind of indicating three events maybe, and that's why we thought being able to collect more data may help us to mixing them together, get more information from users. One study that we did, and I thought it's quite interesting, so I wanted to highlight it here. We wanted to see how player type would reflect in their behavior as they are playing, so in a co-located setup. So we built a little tool based on existing research, and then based on the research, there were 9 different kind of behavior that were identified that people in co-located setup would show, such as they may share their success, so they achieve something and they talk to each other like, oh, we did a good job, or they may share their failure, kind of saying that, oh, we could do this too, indicating that they were upset that they couldn't complete the game. Maybe share awareness of something, so helping each other could be there, or like trash talk, as I have on the top, which is kind of celebrating their win and in compared to their opponent. And one thing again, based on the previous research, we thought if the players have kind of a killer background or profile, player profile, we expect to see more trash talk. So they want to celebrate that success in comparison to their opponent. So these are what we could observe from just watching them or listening to them as they are playing and are discussing. There were some interesting cases though. Like we had this case that there were a player with a killer personality, but we observed 0 trash talk during the gameplay, and that's we were like, okay, so what's happening here? Why this guy didn't celebrate his achievements? And I wanted to show you the video because I thought this is actually kind of maybe interesting or funny as well. So here is that session, that particular. So that's our player with a killer personality and playing with his wife. So when we interviewed them afterward, he said, of course, I didn't want to say something because I didn't want to upset my wife. But the cool thing, and that's true, and that's good. But what it just showed that some of our methods for collecting data may miss some important information. That's just an interesting example. So what I want you guys to look in the video as you see them play, look at the change in his physiological measure, or GSR in this case. So he's the green one associated to him, and you see a big change as soon as he realized he's gonna win the game. So let me play that, and then I'm gonna explain it a little bit more.
What's missing on a Sphinx cat?
So
Two odds are rolling, and no sympathy from me. To the ooze.
So sorry. So what was again what we thought was interesting, that although he didn't show the behavior of celebration, but his body still reacted to the event of winning because that's his personality. He gets happiness and excitement from winning the game. He may not show it for not upsetting his wife, but still the body reacts to that. And that's why one of the reasons that we spent some time researching physiological measure with the hope that they could reveal some information that may not possible to get from other data. And as I said at the beginning, I have a link to all these kind of studies in the website and also in the slides if you want to check them out later. So that kind of motivated one of the first paper that I did on this topic. And in terms of using physiological measure, it's not a new technology or new science, let's say. Many researchers have used that, but looking at the comparison between them, especially in the game evaluation, most of them, they look at what we call it like a tonic analysis. So they look at the, let's say, overall changes in a player's physiological data to compare with the result of self-reporting measures such as questionnaires. So the type of analysis would be the average of players' GSR was this number, and that correlate with what they entered into the questionnaire. And in this work, what we proposed, we said, okay, maybe instead of looking at the whole experience, how about we look at what we call it phasic data. So we chunk it into a smaller piece, and then we look at the change into those measure. We won't associate it with a good experience or bad experience or happiness, but what we can associate it with is a change of their feeling or emotion. And then we could use that data to improve our self-reporting measures. So similar in the previous case that I showed you guys, I could then go back to the player and say, look, you didn't say anything about getting happiness from winning, but look at this signal. I see an increase. How do you explain that? And then he would tell me that, yeah, that's why. That's what happened. I was really happy. I didn't talk about it. But now that you pinpoint that event, I can tell you this is why I got so happy. And in this paper, we basically compared different events that we can highlight through different measures. And we showed that physiological measure may be able to help us to identify certain type of usability issues that may not be obvious through other methods. Then one thing happened again through working with companies. I was super happy. I was like, oh my God, I invented something super awesome. So we were working on a project, and we went back to the developer, like, look at these like 200 issues I found. You need to care. And they were like, oh my God, we don't care. This is too much. Can you tell me what happened? Like, what are the top 5? I was like, okay, so we need to find a better way of communicating these information. And then that kind of motivated a technique that I created, and that was part of my PhD. I call it Biometric Storyboard. And it's okay, maybe we can kind of tell the story of player experience in that playtest to the developer based on the change in their GSR data. And what I could then do, I could kind of have the important events, as you see here on the top, highlighted, and then associated with things that they said it was good or things that they said it was bad. So again, kind of collecting those data and putting them on some sort of a graphical representation to discuss the issues with the developer. And again, we did a work in progress at CHI 2012, where we talked about different or iteration in creating biometric storyboard. One big issue we noticed is this could be really time consuming to try to create these for individual player. So to expand that, we built a tool that could do most of the part automatically. So could collect, in this case, GSR, facial and facial EMG, so smiling and frown muscle, and also comments that the player make post-session interview based on the events that we indicate. So the tool would collect all of them and then create some sort of a report like this. And we had this work published at CHI as a full paper. And I want to show you a video of the work that we did.
Methods are available in games user research to formally test how game designs work for players. In particular, the usefulness of user tests and physiological measurements for providing formative feedback for game designers on their titles under development has not been fully studied. paper, we investigate the differences in game design between games developed using formative methods from a classic user evaluation approach. In our study, we evaluated 3 versions of a game developed under 3 user testing conditions. First, we observed players performing gameplay actions, then conducted interviews and questionnaires on what they liked and didn't like, a traditional user test. Second, we used a physiological-based evaluation approach called Biometric Storyboards that combines designer intentions, user experience evaluations, and physiological player reactions in a single user evaluation report. Finally, in the third condition, serving as control, we developed a game without user evaluation, only based on designers' expertise. We show that using either classic user tests or physiological-based user tests leads to games that are better designed and rate more positively than games designed without any form of user testing. The purpose of games user research, or GUR, is to gain insights from players to help game developers optimize their designs. The quality of game design ultimately depends on the developer's creative vision. Our study was the first at CHI to show the impact of this contribution from start to finish. We intend to move this discussion forward by addressing how the different techniques inform designers and consequently each make an impact on the design process.
So, as I said again, the full paper is available, and I'm going to be here after the talk if you want more information on this. I'm happy to talk about it. But one thing we learned, if I go back to the previous slide, so again, as you see, we are creating these reports for individual player, and that again proved inefficient and also less motivating for developer, because when we give them the report, they were like, okay, this is 1 player or this is 2 player. How do I trust this data? Like, what if you have 10 players? What's gonna happen? So then, we kind of continue on this work, and we say, okay, how about we find a way to still collect those data that we were collecting. We also kind of could include other data sources such as players' movement in a level or comments that they make in the post-session interview or as a think cloud during the playtest. And then we could kind of visualize or color code the movement lines or trajectory with the change in their physiological measure. So that's this visualization that we created. So I'm gonna have a bigger one coming soon. But here shows kind of a 1 level. This shows the level design. And I don't know how well you can see the lines. So that shows where players are moving, and the color code are color coded based on the level of GSR level. So what's kind of interesting to see, then if you kind of zoom in, you see like in this Mario level, here is an area that is relatively easy or safe. So there is no or less opportunity to fall off, or the kind of enemies are kind of weaker. And you see that users are kind of experiencing lower level of arousal in compared to here, where they have to, let's say, make kind of 2 jumps, and the turtle are slightly more challenging. And you could see that the average GSR is higher, so it's kind of more reddish, kind of communicating that, as well as some other information that you could see. For example, only 1 user went up here to collect these rewards. So as a developer, if you wanted more users to go there, you probably had to maybe move that platform a little bit lower to their field of view. But there were also some interesting observations. For example, here you see kind of again at the end of the level, the players had to do what they kind of perceived as a kind of a big jump. And they probably felt more excitement for doing that. But you see from the data that none of them failed the jump. So they kind of perceived that as maybe something difficult, but they managed it easily. Or you could also argue, okay, they were maybe excited because they were towards the end of the level. So that might be why they are excited. But again, in this paper, what we try to contribute is different way that you could collect this data for multiple player and visualize it at the same time. So I have one to conclude the physiological work. There is this recent paper at CHI 2017 that we used kind of a mixed method to evaluate the onboarding phase of 3 different games. The reason we were motivated to do that, as you know, it's kind of getting easier to develop more game, That kind of means the market is kind of crowded. So it's harder for games to be visible to player. The student who worked on this kind of had this picture, and she said it's like trying to find a nail into this kind of pack of hay for your game to be seen. But what's more important is once your game were found, once the player started, they downloaded your game and they have it. What you don't want to happen is you lose them at this stage. So that kind of emphasize on the experience, or what we call it first-time user experience, in the onboarding phase, on how your game could retain players and help them to progress in the game. And as I've showed you, physiological data could bring this kind of a detailed information on how player experience. Arguably, it could be too difficult to look at like 16 hours of gameplay and evaluate it in that detail. But what we argued in this paper was if you could use these highly detailed data maybe to look at the first 10 minutes, that's something possible, and make sure to kind of have a kind of a clean experience for players to go through. So that's kind of the contribution of this work. So as I said, as I was kind of going through my kind of life background, I said in 2015 I got the opportunity to work with Execution Lab. So they were an investor into small game companies based in Montreal. And through working with them, I had the opportunity to work with, I think, around 19 small studios, and got really interested into adopting these methodologies for those studios. And a few things I wanted to mention to kind of highlight probably the importance of the tools and the small studios. So if you look at data that Canadian Entertainment Software Association released, you see that small and medium-sized studios, they kind of they conclude like more than 80%, actually close to 90% of Canadian game studios. What's more interesting in the research report, you could see that the game industry has been contributing around 3.7 billion into Canadian GDP, and that's a significant increase. So if you look at 2015 to 2017, you see there were 3 billion to 3.7. What excited me more when I look at this chart where they show the average project resources, and this is quite interesting, and I'm going to highlight that because you've seen game industry is contributing more to the GDP from 2015 to 2017, but they are spending on all the different platforms. You see there is a decrease in resources in terms of budget and in terms of team size. What kind of this shows us is, I would argue, because of the advances in the technology, now building games is not as expensive maybe as it used to be. Moreover, there are loads of tools now available that streamline the process of maybe building, or facilitate, like maybe a content that used to be created by a team of 10 now can be created by one person only. So that's why since working with kind of Execution Lab and looking at kind of Canadian market, I got a lot more interested towards looking at adopting usability and user experience methodologies to be able to help smaller studios. And there are 2 papers that we wrote on this topic, if you want to check it. But what I mean by adopting or mixing them is that looking at maybe metrics that we can collect from the game, and then map it to maybe observation data that we are collecting, or optimize our interview process maybe. And I'm going to show you some examples. So in this chart, we are looking at, or we are collecting the time it would take for each player to complete a level. And what we noticed is, in most levels, they were all, and the developer told us it should be around 4 minutes for each level. But then we have this level here that it took like 16 minutes for one player, and other players spent significantly more time on them. What can we do with this data is, if we recorded the whole gameplay, rather than analyzing, if we were trying to fix the pacing, for example, rather than analyzing all this individual level, we could just go and say, okay, level 5 is the level that our data shows we are not supporting, or the players are not doing what the developer intended for. So we could just focus on looking at that 10 minutes and see what happened, rather than analyzing the whole half an hour of the gameplay. In this, another example, we have a heat map of players' position and player jump. So what we could see is they basically are stuck at this point because they kind of stayed here and they did lots of jumping. Again, imagine we have this for all the levels. Then we could go and say, okay, like this level that took loads of time, here is the heat map. We see something happening here. Let's go and fix that. So optimizing the process of improving gameplay and helping developer to be able to do that easier. So as I said, my kind of research started shifting towards creating tool for user evaluation and finding new maybe combination of methods that could help smaller studios. And there is a work that full paper we presented at FTG a few months ago. And we have a video I wanted to show you. And that's a tool, that's a Unity plugin that could collect the metrics such as player movement, as well as physiological measure, and then overlay that into the level design in a Unity level editor, so that developer could interact with the data that we collect and decide what they may want to fix in their level.
Researchers are developing a set of techniques and tools to measure and study players' behavior to provide information for game developers in order to optimize the player experience of their games. One major challenge is the sheer quantity of data that needs to be analyzed and understood. This can often be daunting and confusing to decipher. This requires game developers to painstakingly review often large-scale playtesting data to make improvements to their games. To address this, we have been developing a tool to assist the collection and representation of playtesting data, such as players' in-game behavior, such as tracking their movement, and physiological measures, such as tracking their arousal state. Although various data representation or reporting techniques have already been introduced, most of these techniques only focus on statically displaying large amounts of data captured directly via telemetry without integrating qualitative or contextual data on players' emotional experience. The tool we have been developing is a Unity 3D-based plugin that facilitates the gathering of playtesting data, visualizes this data, and provides an interactive, in-game 3D environment for players to explore and interact with. The visualization can be viewed from different angles, for instance, free fly, player's eye, and bird's eye view. The tool represents the data as an extra metadata layer over existing level design. Following from previous research, we currently collect movement data, which is obtained at regular time intervals using telemetry methods. Physiological data is captured in the form of galvanic skin response to measure the player's arousal state. The movement data is represented by rendered lines showing the path of the players and has a specific color based on the recorded galvanic skin response value. These colors range between green, which is a low level of arousal, and red, which is a higher level of arousal, to provide a clear visual interpretation of the player's emotional state throughout their playthrough. Being able to interact with the data in a 3D environment is the key feature of the tool, where game developers can explore and interact with the visualization either using their computer screen for 2D view or an Oculus Rift or Cave for 3D viewing. In this interactivity demo, we will present our tool and different data visualizations on various game prototypes. Conference attendees will be able to explore and interact with our visualizations in both 2D and stereoscopic 3D on the Oculus Rift. The tool is designed as a Unity plugin, so the conference attendees can also bring their own Unity games to try with our tool. Our tool is aimed at game researchers and indie game developers.
So one thing I wanted to mention. So this video was for interactivity. We didn't get accepted there, but then we got accepted as a full paper, which was better. But as we mentioned, the tool is available. So if you want to try it, we can give you the plugin, and then you could work it. You could have it on your game, and then even it's kind of, you could have the source code. So if you want to modify it, you could do that as well. So again, kind of building on that, we thought, so we want to help indie studios. How about try to create more tools? And that's where the kind of our research interest is moving. And this work is done by one of our researchers, Samantha, who is actually sitting there. So you could talk to her more about her work. The idea was that, you know, conducting playtesting could be really difficult. We want to bring loads of players in, and it could be costly. It could be difficult to have a nice representation of our target audience. And the idea Samantha came up with was, how about we have an AI to go and play the game, and then we could actually modify the AI to play as, you know, like players with a different personality, and like in this graphs, like we could see. So again, depending on your player type or preferences, you may kind of go for enemies and then try to collect weapons, or you may find a way to avoid them and try to go to the objective, or you may have, you know, different preference in how you would complete a level challenge. It's very difficult in playtesting to make sure that all these conditions would have been maybe tested and evaluated. So what we are trying to do is, by building this AI player, to use them in earlier stages of development. So rather than, again, based on our experience, when we conduct the first few iteration of playtesting, we always find, like, let's say, usability issues. And it's important to fix them before we move on to more important issues, arguably like user experience issues. So with works or tools like this, we could help developer to kind of get rid of the major issues, at least in terms of their level design or player navigation through the level. And in later stages, when we bring actual player, they could focus on identifying, let's say, maybe user experience issues. So that's a work that we are currently working on. The other project that we currently have, and Noor is the one leading that. So I showed you the graph of different visualization, but one criticism is, it's still difficult for developer to know where to focus. Like, imagine you have loads of levels. Where do you need to what do you need to change? So we are working on creating, different visualization technique, on evaluating them to see which one developers may find more useful. And like, these are the two examples that we are looking at. As you've seen, the main path is highlighted in both, and then the color around it is based on the physiological measure, and there are two different representations. So here, all the kind of a color coding have the same contrast. In the second one, if you see, like in this case, because it was only one player experiencing that level of emotion, the contrast is much lower than other visualizations. So we are working on these techniques as well to improve how we represent and this data back to the developer. The final project that I want to highlight, again, building on this research, now we are looking at how could we go beyond, let's say, traditional gaming. So in this project, we are looking at spectators and how they would interact with the system, or can we give the opportunity to a spectator to be able to modify the game or manipulate the game board, and that's a project that Samantha work on as well, and it's going to be available soon. We are giving a talk at MIGS in 2 weeks about this project. If you are coming to MIGS, could be an interesting, and we are more than happy to discuss about these works after the talk. Just to summarize, I have, I think, 2 more slides to go. The domain or the field that I feel we belong to, or at least my research belongs to, is called game user research. So there is a IGDA special interest group called on this, which we are part of. We have our 2 kind of conferences per year, and today they're actually having a conference in London, or just finished it, where my colleagues are presenting their work. So if you find this type of research exciting, there are loads of resources on the website of game user research, a special interest group, that you could go and check. Like, all the talks on the conferences are recorded and freely available for review. A little bit of a self-promotion at the end. We just did a book, edited volume on this topic. It's coming out in January. So it's a collection of around 29 chapters, each written by industry experts on different methodologies for this type of research. Thanks again for being here. Thanks so much to my research team. Obviously, I didn't do this work alone. They did it, and also my sponsors. And as I said, more than happy to answer any questions you may have. I think officially we have the room until 3. Unofficially, we have it until 3:30. Is that right? So we have 45 minutes, let's say, for discussion. And also feel free to email me with any questions, and check the papers if you want on the website. Thank you so much.